Missions is the reason we cooperate as a convention of churches, and on this episode of The Road to New Orleans, presented by New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, we sit down with the president of the International Mission Board, Paul Chitwood, and get all the info about the IMB and this year's sending celebration at the annual meeting. Welcome again to this week's edition of The Road to New Orleans, brought to you by New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. We've got a great treat for you this week. We have Dr. Paul Chitwood from the International Mission Board joining us this week. Dr. Chitwood, thanks for coming on.
Hey, thank you, Jonathan, for having me. Excited to be gearing up for New Orleans and all that the Lord will let us experience there as a denominational family comes together, and good to visit with you always.
Absolutely. Now, last year was a big year for the IMB. You guys had some new branding and a logo that you dropped at the last year's annual meeting in Anaheim. You had the largest Lottie Moon Christmas offering ever, with over $200 million given to that. You had hundreds of new missionaries commissioned. So do you feel like things are kind of starting to line up for you now that we're on the other side of the pandemic?
Well, I really do. We're very excited about where we are in partnership with Southern Baptist and in addressing the world's greatest problem. The clarity that our new brand and the messaging around that has given us and helped give Southern Baptist, I think, has us in a great position to really elaborate on that and rally Southern Baptist around that at this year's annual meeting. As an organization as a whole, the Lord's kindness and favor is clear. The support of Southern Baptist is clear. We sent 301 new workers last year. We're hoping and praying to send at least 400 this year. So we're seeing, again, that candidate pipeline is really ramped up coming out of the pandemic slump. The giving is ramped up, so the provision is there. And we're seeing more engagements by churches. In fact, our team told me just yesterday, our mobilization team, as they track our engagement with churches, that we, in the first quarter of this year, we dating on our fiscal year, so going back to October 1st through December, compared to what that looked like a year ago, we have more than doubled the church engagements year over year. We've touched base with over 20,000 churches, even in the first quarter of the year. So it's the metrics are going up, and we're seeing the impact around the world.
Well, I mean, you mentioned that you're having the missionaries and personnel connect directly with Southern Baptist churches. What kind of results have you seen from that? Like, what's the end game, and what has IMB seen from those connections?
Yeah, what we're really hoping to see is just more churches doing the basics of praying for the lost and praying for the missionaries, giving to the work, going themselves, and sending more missionaries. And in all those categories, we're seeing the lift happen. More are signing up for the IMB Pray app, more wanting to include prayers of regular cadence in their worship services, prayers specifically for the nations and for their missionaries. More are giving, obviously, with a record Lottie year. And again, the early receipts this year are just about as strong as they were last year, and it's really early. So we're optimistic where we'll end that again this year. In terms of going, of course, the pandemic was horrific on our volunteers. We would typically see literally tens of thousands of volunteers every year out on the mission field, on those short-term mission trips, walking alongside of our missionaries, encouraging them, being a great workforce to them, and just being a blessing and a benefit. That dropped literally to zero in year one of the pandemic. We saw, maybe a few hundred tracking back in year two, but we're up into the thousands already this year. So the volunteers, those who are going, has significantly increased. And then we get to the sending, and that's that candidate pipeline. We dropped down in the 700s and number of people in the pipeline during the pandemic. When I came into the role, we were into the 300s. And so we had seen that get up to close to 1,100. Then the pandemic hit us. that hurt us. We're back up over 1,100 now consistently every week as we track that weekly. We're hoping to keep pushing that up to 12, 1,400 because again, that is where our missionaries come from, out of that candidate pipeline. With that growing, again, we're able to see just the lift coming, and we are convinced, and you can't convince me otherwise. All this is resulting certainly from the Lord's help, but from deepening relationships with pastors and with churches, with Southern Baptists across the land.
Yeah. So let's talk about the pipeline for just a second. That's something you talk about quite frequently. We've heard about it, but I don't know if a lot of people understand what that means. I mean, it takes, you don't just have like 50 people sign up and you send 50, because not everybody makes it through it. So like you have to have that pipeline of hundreds and hundreds and hopefully, one day thousands of candidates coming into the IMB to be able to send out workers into the field. So tell us kind of how that works and maybe the attrition rate or something like that, if you can share that information.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. Let me break that down for you. Every year, we have about 300 of our field missionaries who come home from the field. These are journeymen who complete their 2-year term. These are retirees who have finished maybe decades on the field. And then we have those who, for whatever reason, need to come home early before they fulfilled their commitment. That last category, the number who come home before filling their commitment, is what we track in terms of our attrition rate. The attrition rate at the IMB is typically hovered around 4 or 5%. That is incredibly low for a sending organization. To think that we keep 95 to 96% of people who go overseas, they fulfill their term, their commitment before they wrap it. That's huge. It's really positive. Now, to be fair and transparent, it tracked up a little bit over the course of the last couple of years. The impact of the pandemic, the lockdowns around the world, disruptions from significant wars around the world that displaced missionaries, some security issues we had, countries kicking out missionaries. It took a toll on our people. We're still not double digit. We're single digit on attrition rate, but it did tick up a little beyond what we historically see. So we need to replace about 300 missionaries every year. Those come out of that pipeline. That just holds our numbers stable. As you know, and as you also hear me talk about, we want to grow. We want to see Southern Baptists doing more and more among the nations. We want to see at least 400 new personnel going out every year, and they come out of that pipeline. How does the pipeline work? What we refer to when we're talking about our pipeline is anybody who's made an application and begun a conversation with the IMB. We track those individuals. We're working with them regularly. Some enter the pipeline without a sense of clarity. Do I know for sure if I'm going to go? No. Should I fill out an application? My answer is always yes, because that lets us begin a conversation with you and your pastor and your church. Just get a feel for what the Lord is doing in your life. Help us walk with you through that process. So we know a lot of people enter the pipeline who are not going to ultimately be IMB missionaries. There are others who, for whatever reason, maybe it's a health issue comes up, maybe a family issue, that they end up not being able to go or not going with the IMB. It's a process, typically around 10 to 12 months that you're in the pipeline before you're appointed and you head out overseas. Some can do it quicker. We have people getting through it in 4 or 5 months right now who are really determined. But over the course of that time, obviously things happen. So right now we're averaging 30, 35% of people in the pipeline who actually end up as overseas missionaries. That's why we need a pipeline of 12 to 1,400 when we're talking about getting 400 plus new missionaries overseas every year. But the pipeline is a huge deal to us. And this is where I'm so grateful for your messaging executive committee, the whole emphasis on calling out the called, and the way we're trying to champion that with pastors and local churches, calling out the called, not just to pastoral ministry or youth ministry or church planting here in the U.S., but calling out the call to the nations. We want to see more and more going because we know that the problems we're addressing around the world, the greatest problem being lostness, is a growing problem. This is a problem we're not getting ahead of. We're losing ground every day. The number of people dying lost around the world every day grows, and that's why we need more workers among the nations.
Yeah, and just one point on the attrition rate on the 4 to 5% that come home unexpectedly or unplanned. The reason that is so low, I'm guessing a big piece of that reason, I guess. I mean, it's not all of it, but it's because of the giving of Southern Baptist. They're not having to raise their own funding and support on the field because that's taken care of back home. So, I mean, I
That's
guess
exactly
that's a
right.
massive piece, I guess, right?
Yeah, unbelievably huge, and it goes even beyond that. It's still in the giving category, but the giving is not just a relief of pressure on the missionary because they don't have to raise their own support. The giving also provides a system of support that allows longevity on the field, allows families to fight through challenges that would bring others home, but because IMB missionaries have a support network around them, they're on a team. They're not out there by themselves. So they have team members for them. They have what we call our member care team. We have professionals who are there to walk alongside of them. We have medical professionals. We have TCK education consultants. There's so many components of the support that, to your point, Jonathan, are made possible by the generosity of Southern Baptists. And that's why the IMB is so unique. The IMB is unique in missionary sending and set apart from every other agency because of the holistic support that an IMB missionary receives. And it all goes back to a Southern Baptist writing a check, a gift to the Lord, a pastor advocating for the work among the nations, church members, churches give through the cooperative program, the Lottie Moon Christmas offering.
Yeah.
That generosity is what allows workers to be sustained and their presence to be sustained around the world, impacting lostness.
Yeah, there are no Lone Ranger IMB missionaries out there. Southern
No,
Baptists have a
that's right.
family of missionaries across the world. So something to be thankful for. Now, hey, I mean, we're supposed to be talking annual meeting, Road to New Orleans. So let's get to that. I mean, this has all been great. I've really enjoyed that conversation, and it's really good information Southern Baptists need to hear. But let's talk missionary commissioning service. Always a highlight for people at the annual meeting. Why do you think that event connects so well with messengers at the annual meeting?
Well, it's what brought us together long ago in 1845. Southern Baptist Convention organized itself. Obviously, there's a dark side to that. There's separating over the issue of slavery, which we lament and of which we have repented. However, the upside of it is Southern Baptists from day one, the very first meeting, were committed to sending missionaries, formed their home mission board and their foreign mission board, and appointed their first two missionaries to the nation. So this was the purpose for which we came together. This is not only what brought us together, it's what's kept us together. I hear every day from pastors who tell me, hey, listen, don't you all mess things up at the IMB. This is why we're in it. We're in it to get the gospel to the nations. And when they say that, I also know that they value, they're very supportive of our seminaries, North American Mission Board, everything we do together. But it's the ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
We work in an ecosystem, and yet I think what resonates most deeply and most strongly with Southern Baptists is addressing the world's greatest problem and knowing the needs around the world. When we come together at that annual meeting and send out every year dozens and dozens of new workers to the nations, it's something to be proud of in a godly way. It's something to celebrate. It's something to remind us, oh, why do we stick with this? Why do we so value the cooperative program? Why do we still work together? Well, maybe we don't agree with everything, but why are we still committed to this family? And at this family reunion, when there's crazy uncles and others that were wondering, hey, why are we connected to those? Well, because there's a cause that brought us together, that keeps us together, and that's the cause addressing the world's greatest problem with the gospel. And we know that the gospel gets to the lost through a missionary presence, and we're going to be sending more missionaries in June out of New Orleans this year.
Yes, and you mentioned meeting needs. And we're recording this right around the 1 year anniversary of the Ukraine invasion by Russia, and that has unfortunately kind of created a major opportunity for IMB and Send Relief to meet needs in Western Europe. Eastern Europe. So can you talk about that and what you've seen over the past year? I know you've made several trips, or at least on 1 or 2 trips, I think, over to Eastern Europe. And just some of the work that IMB's been able to do and how that's presented an unfortunate opportunity, but an opportunity nonetheless.
Well, it has. It's presented an opportunity for us to provide help and the greater opportunity us to provide hope, to see the advance of the gospel in Ukraine, to see the way the Lord is using this trauma, this horrific event, to bring together Ukrainian Baptists and Polish Baptists and Romanian Baptists committed to not just getting help for physical needs to Ukrainians in the country and Ukrainian refugees, but concerned deeply about the spiritual needs of those individuals and to see the gospel going forward. So, first, generosity among Southern Baptists has just blown us away. Southern Baptists have given to this point over $15 million just for the relief efforts surrounding the war in Ukraine. So a lot of that has been work that we've been doing with churches on the border in Romania, Poland, other surrounding countries, receiving refugees, feeding programs, putting beds and cots in churches, and sending volunteers and supporting them in their work. But we've also seen literally tons and tons of food and relief efforts. Relief supplies have gone into Ukraine that have been funded by Southern Baptists. There's some places in Ukraine where we work with partners. Of course, we've been working there for decades. So we had a lot of partners, a lot of deep connections there, a lot of workers who have spent much of their lives in Southern Baptist IMB missionaries in that country. And so we know there are people who we can work with there who are housing refugees and working with displaced peoples, and suddenly they lose their electricity. The bombing, hits the power grid. Can we respond? Absolutely, we can respond. We can get truckloads of generators in there, get them back up and going. And so there's heat for those who would be cold at night. They have the capacity to prepare meals for those who are hungry. It's just a beautiful display of a love of Christ being shown through Southern Baptists. The other thing I would mention here, just along the spiritual impact, this war has become an opportunity for the gospel. And it's hard to think of it in that way, but it really has. I saw this early on, Jonathan. I think it was my second trip into the area, the region. The war was a month in at that point, and I was visiting in a church basement just maybe 2 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. We were in Romania. And in that church basement, ran into a lady with her daughter and her mother. They were seeking refuge there, been staying there a few days. And she had come to Christ through the witness of, we had some volunteers there from SBC churches here, as well as our partners, Romanian Baptists. She had come to Christ through the testimony of those individuals. And here's what she said. She said, up until the war began, I was living my life lost and not knowing it and not caring. The war has caused me to realize I was lost and to understand what that means. And through this horrible event, I've come to Christ. And she said that with a smile on her face.
Wow.
So indeed, the Lord is using these circumstances and turmoil around the world to advance his kingdom.
Yes, absolutely. And Dr. Chitwood, we are so thankful for you, all of our missionary personnel across the world. And thanks for spending some time with us today here on the road to New Orleans.
Hey, great to be with you again. Appreciate the opportunity. Look forward to seeing you in New Orleans.
And we look forward to seeing you in New Orleans. Thanks for joining us again this week on the road to New Orleans, presented by New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary.